Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad that you could join us today for our discussion on the findings of our recent report, Fossil Fuel Layoff, the Economic and Employment Effects of a Refinery Closure on Workers in the Bay Area. I'm Jessie Hammerling. I'm the co-director of the Green Economy Program at the UC Berkeley Labor Center. We co-published this report with the BlueGreen Alliance, funded by the California Workforce Development Board. I'm going to introduce our great panelists, but first I wanted to start things off with a little background on the report and how and why we decided to do this project. So in October of 2020, the Marathon Oil Refinery in Contra Costa County, California, was shut down and over 700 workers were laid off. 345 of them were members of the United Steelworkers Local 5. UC Berkeley Labor Center and BlueGreen Alliance worked with Dr. Virginia Parks to conduct a survey of United Steelworkers workers who were laid off, so we could gain insights into how they experienced this type of layoff and what types of challenges they faced in the aftermath. And this study is really the first of its kind. It's a representative survey of workers' experiences in the aftermath of a fossil fuel layoff, documenting the financial and other types of challenges in areas of their lives, illustrating what the post-layoff job search really looks like for folks in their own words. So we know that, that layoffs happen all the time in many different kinds of industries, but what's really important here is that it's a petroleum refinery that was shut down. And that's important because, we see it as a bellwether for the types of transitions to come as we continue to move our economy towards clean energy and away from fossil fuels. So I want to be super clear up front that the interest in doing this study and this report was not to make a case against making the energy transition. We think it's vitally important that we understand the real needs and challenges of different communities affected by the energy transition so that we know what we need to do and what kinds of plans we need to be putting in place now so that we can make these changes happen in a way that doesn't leave anyone behind. So we've got a great panel gathered here to discuss the report and its findings. First, we've got Dr. Virginia Parks, who's the lead author on the report, a professor in the Department of Urban Planning and Public Policy at UC Irvine and faculty director of the UC Irvine Labor Center. We have Tracy Scott, the president of United Steelworkers Local 5, which represented workers laid off at the facility. We have Josh Sonnenfeld, California Economic Development Transition Strategist with the BlueGreen Alliance and facilitator of the Contra Costa Refinery Transition Partnership, a state high road training partnership which commissioned the study. So first, just a couple things on housekeeping. So the format here is a discussion among panelists. So I'll be posing a series of questions so that you can hear from each of our experts here, but we're not going to have any formal PowerPoints or anything. We'll have 10 minutes dedicated to audience Q&A at the end. Feel free to submit questions at any point via the Q&A function in the webinar. This session is being recorded and we'll make it available on our website afterwards. And please use the Q&A function if you have any comments or questions for the moderator or for any of the panelists. Thanks. Let's dive in. So I'm going to toss the first question to Tracy Scott. Tracy, can you start by telling us really in your own words what happened when Marathon announced that the refinery was closing? What was your reaction and what did Local 5 members experience after the layoff? Oh, Tracy, you got to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the question, Jessie. And it would start by going back to April 16th of 2020 when the union and the workforce received notice that because of the fossil fuel product demand destruction brought about by COVID-19 and the shelter-in-place protocols that were in effect at the time, the Marathon refinery operations would be idled The membership in the workforce at that time were assured that as soon as the demand for petroleum products started to rebound, that a normal or a return to normal refinery operations would be anticipated. And so fast forward a couple of months to Friday, July 31st of 2020, the union received a phone call approximately 15 minutes before an announcement was made to the workforce at the Marathon facility, which we believe the timing of that announcement was planned to take advantage of the weekend news cycle and to minimize the impact on the company. But what I'd like to do is, before I tell you the next part of the story, I would like to ask you to think about your current employment and consider that perhaps you've just started your career as a new employee, or that you're in the middle of your career with maybe 10 or 15 years left before retirement, or maybe you're about to embark upon your retirement next year, So now I'll continue with the description of this. You're invited to a town hall meeting, a virtual town hall meeting, and the manager makes the following announcement. And this is verbatim what was said to our workforce. Today, I have some difficult news to share with you. Based on the company's ongoing assessment of our operating costs and the competitive position of our assets, as well as our continued evaluation of the broader economic and financial impacts of COVID-19, we will formally announce on Monday that the Martinez refinery will be indefinitely idled with no plans to restart normal operations. Martinez will be converted to a terminal. We will continue to utilize our integrated system to meet customer commitments and do not anticipate supply disruptions in the region. In addition, we will announce that the company is evaluating the strategic position of Martinez to a renewable diesel facility, which aligns with the California Low Carbon Fuel Standards objectives and MPC's greenhouse gas reduction targets. Transitioning from temporary to indefinite idling means most jobs at the refinery will no longer be necessary. And unfortunately, that means most employees in these jobs will be laid off. About 60 roles are needed to support the terminal operations. We anticipate that phased layoffs for salaried employees will most likely begin in October, followed by the start of phased layoffs for hourly employees, most likely at the end of October and/or early November. Most reductions will be completed by the end of the year. At that point, the meeting was concluded, and people were left to grapple with their own feelings. And I guess now I would ask you to think about, given what you just heard, what's your first thought? And what's your first concern as a person? By October 30th, as Jessie mentioned, of 2020, 345 union members and another 350 unrepresented employees were laid off at the Marathon facility. And it's also necessary, I think, at this point to mention the thousands of peripheral jobs in the local economy that provide support services to an employer of this size were also lost. To the next part of your question, Jessie, I think, my first reaction, my thoughts turned to my friends and family and former co-workers at the refinery that were going to be devastated by the news and the reality of losing their careers and their financial security. In the first year of the pandemic, they were let go from what had been represented to them as the job they would retire from. And many had not actively looked for work for a very long time. As I've said before, it was a gut punch, and it would take some time to get over it. Some still haven't, and some never will. And I'm one of the latter. What did my members experience after the layoff? Uncertainty, anxiety, fear, frustration. Many started by filing for unemployment insurance, and they quickly became aware of the difficulties of doing so. The process for filing for unemployment in an overwhelmed online system with a job search function that couldn't even conceive of what they did for a living was not very encouraging. Despite being highly skilled and highly trained, They could not find appropriate job search criteria to apply within the system that would generate potential, lists of potential of good job leads. The job search engines online were seemingly better than the state's own system for providing this purpose. Trying to figure out how to pay mortgages, utilities, buy groceries on $450 a week from the maximum unemployment insurance award in California, when they had been accustomed to earning $2,000 to $2,500 per week without overtime prior to being laid off. $450 a week is the equivalent of $11.25 an hour. And, the average employee out there made $50 an hour. So that brought about a lot of financial insecurity. And then came the loss of their medical and dental and vision benefits, placing families in a situation that many hadn't experienced since the beginning of their adult lives, having held their refinery jobs for many years and decades. So that's
thanks.
much,
yeah. Thank you for starting us off there, Tracy. I think it's really important to sort of start with the lived experience of people who went through this. And I appreciate you presenting it that way to help folks understand and kind of put yourself in the shoes of people going through this. I want to turn to Virginia for the next question. If you could tell us a little bit more about this study. What did your research involve and what findings stood out to you the most?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jessie. It's really, my study just confirms what Tracy shared with us. And it was really an opportunity to center workers' experience. What we really wanted to do was be truthful to that worker experience. And so I really took some time to design a representative survey. And that is something that really stands out about this report that we've all been involved in is it is representative, and we can say with great certainty, this is the experience of these workers. So I had a pretty involved survey that workers took. And then what I was able to do was, based on those survey responses, sample within that and do interviews with workers. And so those interviews are also representative of the workers at the Martinez facility. And so we get numbers. We really can put a number on, the 24% wage cut that these workers experienced. 3 out of 4 workers were able to find a job a year after layoff, but still 26% remained unemployed. And there are some folks who still don't have jobs. And so this is what we were able to do through this survey. And it took a lot of time, but we really hope that the experience of these workers at the Martinez facility can help us to pave the way forward as we move into this clean energy transition to make sure that workers aren't left behind.
Thanks so much, Virginia. And we're going to dive more into a conversation about the findings of the report with both of you. But first, I wanted to also invite Josh Sonnenfeld into the conversation. Josh, can you tell us a little bit more about BlueGreen Alliance's role in this project and say a bit more about some of the motivations behind doing this study?
Definitely. Thanks, Jessie. And hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. So BlueGreen Alliance is a national alliance of labor and environmental organizations formed about 20 years ago. And we're focused on building the clean economy with a firm belief that we don't have to choose between creating good jobs and protecting the environment, and that we can and must do both. So our work is really driven by our partners. As I mentioned, we were founded by the Sierra Club and the Steelworkers. And we've worked with the Steelworkers for a number of years on refinery safety, especially here in Contra Costa County, California. There's a big fire at the Chevron Richmond refinery, many of you may be aware of, back in 2015, and we worked together with Steelworkers and local environmental justice, other labor unions and health groups to improve refinery safety following that incident. And so after the 2020 closure of the Marathon Martinez refinery, the steelworkers approached us, and understanding that there'd be a phase out of gas-powered cars. That was the same year that Governor Newsom announced the executive order phasing out gas-powered vehicles by 2035. And with the state's climate policy, that we'd be looking at more refinery closures in Contra Costa County, throughout California and beyond. The steelworkers knew that we needed to prepare for refinery transition. And that conversation started what has become the Contra Costa Refinery Transition Partnership. We're a state-funded high road training partnership that includes the Steelworkers Union, our environmental justice partners at the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, the UA Local 342, the Plumbers and Pipefitters Union, UC Berkeley Labor Center, California Labor Federation, and BlueGreen Alliance. And our focus is really on planning for refinery transition and think about how we can center workers and communities in this process together. As I mentioned, we know that refinery transition is happening statewide, nationally. Contra Costa County is not the only place where this is occurring or will be occurring. The state is anticipating something around 90% reduction of gasoline consumption in the state by 2045. And there's a dozen other states that are following California's lead in banning gas-powered cars by 2035. So right now is really the time where we need to be planning for refinery transition and doing so with workers and communities at the center of that process. The Marathon closure was our wake-up moment here in Contra Costa County to intentionally prepare for this transition and to develop these strategies through our partnership in close collaboration with the steelworkers on how refinery workers and communities can be centered in this process and the types of policies we need to ensure that they're supported in the energy transition. So we commissioned this study, and we're so grateful to work with Dr. Virginia Parks and her team through the UC Berkeley Labor Center to really get a deep understanding of the needs of refinery workers experiencing layoffs. So often, there are surveys done of workers before layoffs occur that ask what they might, how they might envision their future careers, but rarely have we ever actually done a study of what's happened after layoff. And I think that's what's so valuable and special about this particular study. And Dr. Parks, as an expert in her field, she was able to engage this representative sample of workers impacted by the closure and lift up their voices themselves. So, Dr. Parks directly asked the workers, what do you need from this transition? And there's really valuable policy recommendations that we'll be getting into from this report. And we're so fortunate to be able to work with the United Steelworkers Local 5, who are willing to share their stories. And I just want to acknowledge, all the Tracy and all the members of Local 5 who are willing to interview with Dr. Parks and participate in the survey. But, again, going back to your question, Jessie, why did we decide to do this study? Because we know refinery transition is coming. We need to prepare for it. Now is the time to do it so that we can make sure that future refinery workers from Local 5, from other unions and other locals around the state and around the country are better prepared for what's coming.
Thanks, Josh. That's really great. So next, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the findings of the report, and this will be a little bit more of sort of open discussion. I'll try to suggest someone to kick it off. So I guess let's start with hearing a bit more about really what the job search looked like for workers after they were laid off and what some of the challenges were. Tracy, you sort of started with a little bit on some of the challenges related to being on unemployment. We've also got a question in the Q&A here about, whether folks had to move to find work and what that looked like. So maybe I'll start with Tracy for this one and then kick it to Virginia.
So I think the job search was difficult from the start. While we were going through the effects bargaining for the closure, we couldn't even get Marathon to commit to internal transfers for people who would be allowed to move to other locations within the company's systems. And as a part of that, they negotiated a severance package that included a 1-year moratorium on hiring back into the company at other locations. So they made it very difficult from the get-go to remain employed in the field that they were in. So it obviously forced people out into the job market, where they certainly tried to apply at similar types of companies, other oil refineries, PG&E, municipal water systems, and things where their job skills were, in their mind, a good fit. However, their lack of job certification through an academic setting or an apprenticeship program or that sort of thing was certainly a disadvantage, and it was hard for them to relate the types of skills that they possessed to potential employers. So,
Virginia,
You want me to?
Yeah,
Sure.
In this one.
So, what Tracy has just said was really one of the most surprising findings of the study, at least for me as a researcher. So that lack of skill certification really jumped out. And I want to come back to that in a minute, but just kind of to give everyone an overview, what I found is that workers experienced significant financial strain. They faced mental health challenges, and then difficulty in securing high quality jobs after they were laid off. And so as I mentioned before, workers were relatively successful in finding work. These are very highly skilled workers. Employers know that to some degree, but that's limited. So 3 out of 4 workers were able to find new jobs within a year after layoff, but at a cost. And so those jobs were on average, the median wage was 24% lower than the median wage before at the refinery. And so that, we know that from studies on displaced workers, but it was really striking to me the extent to which workers could not find, comparably paying jobs and that were union jobs. The second thing was the skill certification, and that really threw me. And it came out in both the surveys, but also the interviews, workers telling me, I just couldn't explain to the possible new employer what my skills were. And labor economists talk a lot about embedded skills, skills that are kind of attached to a workplace. And boy, was that true. And so workers didn't have, a certificate of some sort that they could carry. I have a PhD. I have this diploma. I can carry it around to potential employers. This was not something that these workers had. And something that I learned that I know Tracy is very well aware of is that, refineries have to be certified. They have to meet certain standards. And those certifications and them meeting those standards really depends upon the qualifications of the workforce, but the refinery carries those qualifications, not the workers. So that was really challenging to workers as they were going out onto into the labor market. And one, how do I even explain this very complicated job that I had at the refinery? And then employers just, some workers reported new employers just didn't believe me. And I told them everything that I had done. And then lastly, there's a number of things we could go into, but I just want to point out that safety was a huge issue. And so workers found themselves not only in lower paid jobs, but in more hazardous jobs. They're coming from a very hazardous workplace, the refinery, but that over decades, right, a culture of safety has emerged and is constantly monitored and enforced by workers on the shop floor. They found themselves in new jobs where that safety culture was completely absent. And so the last thing is that more than 50% of workers had cycled through at least 2 if not more jobs a year after layoff. And the number one reason they told me that they had quit a job was because of safety. They knew the costs of an unsafe workplace and they knew it wasn't worth it. I just want to say quickly that 81% of all workers owned homes. So we actually had, at least when I did the survey, a very, very small percentage of workers had moved to find new jobs. A few had, particularly younger workers. But this really speaks to the importance of community and to California of retaining skilled workers. Workers have built their lives, they've built community, and they want to stay in the local region. And so I'm sure if I were to go back out and survey these workers, we would probably find a higher rate of moves, but these are definitely, workers who would like to stay. So I think that's a strength and something that policymakers can really, build upon to keep this skilled workforce in place.
Thanks, Virginia. I'm wondering, Tracy, so, you talked about how people come into these jobs thinking of them as really a lifetime job, that when you start it, you're going to work your whole career there and then retire. And so coming in with that expectation, I think really does affect how people think about the need for their skills to be transferable and like what are strategies for that. But I'm hoping could you give us a little more description about like what kinds of skills and training refinery workers have, and like to what other kinds of industries they are potentially transferable to?
So our members did all manner of work for the company. We had health and safety professionals that were trained in emergency response techniques. They were qualified paramedics on staff. They were mechanical inspectors, weld inspectors. We have people who have, and most in the refinery have their hazardous materials certifications. They do annual week-long hazardous material trainings, so that they are all well versed in the the regulations as it relates to hazardous materials compliance. We operate boilers, furnaces, compressors, pumps, distributed control systems. We had highly trained analyzer and instrument mechanics, machinists, pipe fitters, just every aspect of the work was represented from the standpoint of the proprietary employees, and working under those certifications and licenses that the company was required to maintain from a regulatory standpoint. Our employees did all of that work. We did wastewater treatment, water treatment, and so there's many skills that are employed in a refinery setting that from the standpoint of the scale of the work that they did was far in excess of a lot of the applications outside of the refinery setting. So their capacity for working in pharmaceutical plants, municipal water districts, PG&E, gas distribution systems, and all of that, chemical plants is significant, and would certainly be aided by the ability to have a certification that would document all of that training that occurred under their employment with the corporations that we represent the employees of.
If I may, Jessie, just to really make this concrete for folks who are with us today, because these are things I learned. You have folks who are in the refinery on the fire brigade, but they can't go get a job at a fire department, right? It does not transfer. And so, I think what you can hear is, oh, they have all these skills and there are these jobs that require all these skills. It's just going to be a seamless match. But it's not. And that's what we really learned from this study. You're on the fire brigade, you don't have the certification or training that a local fire department wants or needs, right? So you got to start over. And sometimes those folks are, they're a little older, they're further along in their career, and to go back and start right from the beginning to go into EMT work or a fire department is very hard. Also, just quickly, hazmat training. This speaks to the importance of two things. Of one, the employer verifying those skills, which we've learned from Cal OSHA, they should be doing, but they did not in this case, right? And so everybody needs to, they need to have that checklist of things that need to happen. You also need to have continuous training, and often that training demands that the training happens at a particular work site. So once the worker has been, untethered from that work site, even if they have the interest in keeping up that certification, they don't have an ability to do that. And that's where policy comes in. We need to think about how to quickly intervene to maintain those certifications and trainings. We need to verify it in some way that sits outside of that workplace. And we need to allow for that continual verification.
Thanks, Virginia. I think shortly we're going to pivot into solutions, but I wanted to ask another question about the difference in the job quality that you started to talk about between the jobs that people actually got and how those compared in terms of wages and safety standards to the jobs that people had at the refinery. And so maybe you could give us a few of those sort of high level findings from your report. And maybe I'd like to hear from Tracy more about what enabled the refinery to workers to really uphold the kinds of standards that they had at the facility. So let's start with Virginia there and then kick it to Tracy.
So just repeat what I've said, a 24% cut in wages, but what we call, the span, let's think of it as the wage range was much greater afterwards. So one thing that the union contract does is, there's a lot of equity in pay. And what I found is that I had some workers making as little as, $14, $16 an hour. That's, poverty wages, and a huge change to their lifestyle. Workers reported being financially worse off. And then particularly, I realize you're asking about the jobs. Safety, again, was just a huge issue. So even for workers that went into similar kind of industrial work, they found themselves in workplaces where the safety standards were much lower than what they were used to. So they also talked about work speed up and the stress and just this uncertainty and anxiety of what was next. So they didn't have a sense of how they could move up in their new jobs. And so anyway, there was just, a lot of setbacks, not only on the wages. Also, we need to think about retirement. This just really set workers back from, a long-term kind of career perspective.
Tracy, can you say more about sort of the role of the union and really how you got to such high levels of safety standards and wages at the refineries, and what people experience with this gap in terms of the jobs that they were able to find afterwards?
Well, the oil industry in Contra Costa County, is late 1800s, early 1900s. We, as an organization, Local 5, have been in existence since the 1920s. And we're talking about 100 years of organizing and fighting for the rights of workers and to make the wages and benefits commensurate with the level of danger and hazard in the workplace. We certainly have been on the forefront of many of the state's legislative and regulatory elements dealing with health and safety in the workplace through the Department of or DIR. And we were instrumental in pursuing the industrial safety ordinance in Contra Costa County as a result of an incident that occurred at the Marathon facility when it was owned by Tosco. There was a significant event that caused the loss of 4 lives and an injury to one that was very significant and later cost him his life. And so in 2012, there was a fire at the Chevron facility, and we fought for an increased regulatory environment from the state's perspective under the process safety management regulations under Cal OSHA, and we're waged a 5-year battle to improve the workplace safety requirements in refineries. Unfortunately, those workplace safety requirements under 5189.1 apply to refineries, but we believe as an organization that they need to be applied to manufacturing and industrial settings across the board. I think that the experiences of workplace injuries and loss of life have driven us as an organization to strongly enforce the safety culture in the facilities that we represent workers at, and to fight for our right to employee participation in all aspects of that process safety management systems that are in place. And the last part of your question, I'm sorry.
That's great, Tracy. I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming in to the chat focusing on solutions. So I think given our time, we're going to pivot into the segue to the next topic, and start thinking about what do we do with this, right? Like, what did we learn from this report about what we need to do differently moving forward, and prepare for changes in the fossil fuel industry? And what really do we need to do to make sure that the kinds of outcomes that workers experienced at Marathon aren't what we see more of? And so I'm going to start with Josh on this question.
Thanks, Jessie. Appreciate it. So what do we need to do differently? I have 4 thoughts here. So number 1, we need to actively prepare for refinery transition. So the policy environment has been set. We are phasing out gas-powered cars in California. We're phasing out diesel-powered trucks and other petroleum-based fuels. These policies have already been passed, but we really haven't done much at all at either the state or the federal level to put strategies in place to support workers and communities in this process. And I want to be really clear that it's about workers and communities planning this transition together. Today's focus is on the impacts on workers from the study, and we'll be talking a little bit more about the community piece of this, but this really is a joint conversation. It's about refinery workers and communities planning this transition together, developing strategies around worker transition and around meeting the needs of communities, whether that be addressing the tax-based impacts or dealing with toxic cleanups of facilities and not getting stuck with the bill for it, right? This is a planning process that we need to actively start now, and that's what our partnership in Contra Costa County is beginning to do, to plan those strategies. So that's number 1, is to actively plan for refinery transition. Number 2 is for refinery workers, a key strategy is building this robust safety net for workers. And Dr. Parks in her study has lifted up a lot of the recommendations coming directly from the workers that are the key pieces. So, for example, wage replacement. We shouldn't be having a scenario where workers are making 25% less or 24% less. There should be a period of time that can help folks move into positions with comparable wages or work their way up, right? We have that right now for folks through the Trade Adjustment Act, for folks who lose a job as a result of a factory being moved overseas, but we don't have that for energy workers. We need to fix that. Bridge to retirement. The fact that you had 4 or 5 workers that worked at Marathon that were within 6 months or a year of retirement and not able to take advantage of that retirement should not be happening. That's ridiculous. We can fix that. That's about policies. Third-party certification. Tracy and Dr. Parks have talked about this. making sure refinery workers have that piece of paper that says this is their skill set. We need these folks in the new industries that we're building, the safety culture that Tracy is speaking about, that's so strong within the United Steelworkers and Local 5 in particular. We need that in all the new clean energy industries that we're growing in other sectors of the economy to make sure those facilities are safe. Case management, this is a real need for workers that Dr. Parks has identified in her study, making sure that there's targeted individualized job search assistance, helping people connect with resources, whether that's Medi-Cal or other opportunities to keep paying their mortgage and not lose health insurance and other needs that they have. Counseling services, we know that this is not just a financial impact, it's a mental health impact. And that's something that many workers spoke about, and the stress of layoff and finding new careers, making sure that workers and their families are supported with mental health needs, financial needs, career counseling. So these are the pieces, some, not all of the pieces that make up the worker safety net that I'm speaking towards, and that's discussed in Dr. Parks' study. And we need a sustainable mechanism to pay for all this. So this is something we're very actively looking at, because we know that there's going to be an expense associated with it that we've got to pay for. And this is going to be a 20, 25, 30-year process. And we need to keep the safety net strong for that entire period of time. So number 3, we need to focus on, so the first 2 being actively planning for refinery transition is number 1. Number 2 is building this worker safety net. Number 3 is we need to create the high road jobs in our energy communities to make sure that we have a robust economy, diversified economy that creates jobs for workers to move into. That's leveraging all the enormous state and federal investments we have right now, but to focus those jobs within the communities that are going to need it as a result of the declining jobs within the fossil fuel sector. I want to say that this isn't just clean energy. I know sometimes out there's this idea that workers from fossil fuels should work in solar or wind, and there are certain times and certain places where that might make sense. But as we saw from Dr. Parks' study, where refinery workers in Contra Costa are moving into are the utilities, our manufacturing, our positions that really take advantage of their skill set. So we need to think much more broadly about the whole economy and building the high road jobs, the high quality jobs that refinery workers need, but also that the whole community needs, and that we're working together with our environmental and community partners to think about where does it make sense to site these facilities? How can we make sure that the communities are receiving benefits? How can we make sure that other sectors of the community that haven't had access to high quality jobs in the past can also access those opportunities? So right now is really an incredible time to be doing that high road economic development planning. And lastly, we need to organize. You mentioned the fossil fuel sector, the refineries have been organized for the past 100 years, and we need that culture of safety in all the new industries and all the current industries and new industries we're building. And we need to make sure workers have a voice on the job so they can speak up when there are safety issues or when there are chemical exposure issues or pollutant issues. Workers are really our eyes and ears in these facilities. And so, as we're building our clean economy, we need to be organizing this clean economy and making sure that we're not losing the valuable unions and voice in the job that's been so critical for the current economy. We need to bring that to the new economy as well.
Thanks so much, Josh, for really laying out kind of like a robust, broad strategy for what it's going to take here. And I want to next turn to Virginia and Tracy each and sort of hear your thoughts about, what do we need to do differently moving forward, and how can we make sure that the transition to clean energy is one that really is truly just and equitable and accomplishes, everything that we've been saying, and trying to avoid the mistakes of the past and not replicate some of the challenges that people experienced in the marathon layoff. And I'll start with Virginia on this one.
Thanks, Jessie. Well, first, I just want to agree with everything that Josh said. And I want to say, what an opportunity we have in front of us. That's the thing that I just think I'm so hopeful in that way. We have such an opportunity. We are having this conversation today. We know that the energy transition is coming. It should come. We want to decarbonize the economy. So let's take advantage of it and let's do it right. But let's not transition the energy economy on the backs of fossil fuel workers. It's not their onus, it's ours, right? And we need to do better. So one of the first things I'm going to say is the onus isn't on fossil fuel workers to retrain. That is, the one thing I hope everybody hears from me today is training should not be at the forefront of our policies that we want to put into place. These are already highly skilled workers. And so one thing I say to my students is you can think about upgrading the worker, that's called training, or you can think about upgrading the job. And right now, that's what we need to do. We need to upgrade jobs across the labor market as a whole. And so what an opportunity to not only address the plight of fossil fuel workers, but to raise standards for all workers. And that means putting unions right at the forefront of planning for this transition, ensuring that there's worker voice at all jobs. I mean, this is critical. And that is, a key trigger to making sure that jobs are safe, they pay family supporting wages, they provide workers with dignity and respect on the job. So these are things that we can do, we know how to do, and some of it is very small things like what I focus on in my report. Let's devise a skills passport for these workers, right? So it's stamped here, I can do this, I can do that, and it's certified, and they can have this passport as they move through the labor market to transition into new jobs that might be renewable energy jobs, but they might be all these other jobs that we're talking about, utility jobs, water management, which we've learned are very good matches to these workers' current skills. And just lastly, I do think we need to provide a way in which labor can play a role in all sorts of ways. And so one way, and not to burden them with this, but if certain unions are willing to play this role of benefits negotiators, I think we should devise policy that allows funding to go to unions to play this role of case manager, right? Because they know their workers best, and they also know the other jobs in the labor market really, really well. So let's have them play a key role in all sorts of ways.
Thanks so much, Virginia. That was really great. And I want to give Tracy the last word in this section before we pivot to the audience Q&A. And Tracy, feel free to elaborate on what everybody said here, but what I really, am interested in your thoughts on are what do you hope for your members and your union in the future? And what does a truly just and equitable transition to clean energy look like from your perspective?
So I think just and equitable certainly is in the eye of the beholder. It's jobs with similar salaries and benefits and working conditions, and that include a safe workplace. I think that there is certainly an economic engine that is being lost in the fossil fuel industry going away. And I think that for my members, what I hope is that significant effort and resource go into the economic development that is going to be necessary to build the next iteration of this type of community supporting industry that we've all been a part of, that we've all enjoyed the results of. I think that when you look around our communities, there are certainly a lot of impacts that the tax dollars and revenue that are created through the fossil fuel industry have provided for us all. And as that goes away, we need to find a way to effectively replace that. And so we are not all left to our own devices. We have many examples in this country of communities that were left to their own devices after industries failed or were shifted away from through policy decision, whether it be energy or otherwise. And I think that you know, what I would like to see from my members is a practical and effective way of moving from one industry to another, where labor standards are the same, where the opportunities for themselves and you know, the next generations of their family to find good, solid, safe employment are going to be possible. And you know, I think when our legislature thinks about making policy changes on the order of this magnitude in this or any other area, that all of the stakeholders that are going to be impacted by those policy shifts are included in the process of figuring it out, and to do so before the decision is promulgated or the regulations are promulgated to make it happen, and not after. So.
Thanks, Tracy. We are going to pivot into the audience Q&A. So please keep submitting questions, and thanks to all of you who have been submitting questions so far. The first one I want to highlight really is getting at, or there's a couple to this that are getting at the impacts on the broader community. So both the economic impacts of the refinery closure and the environmental impacts of the refineries and the closure of these refineries. And so I think I'll start with Josh for this one, to think about what the energy transition means for the broader communities in which these facilities are located, and sort of the importance of workers and the surrounding communities working together through these changes, and what it looks like.
Thanks, Jessie. And glad you asked this question. And so for the community needs, I think we need to start by acknowledging that, you know, due to the history of racist housing policies, specifically redlining and decisions around siting, refinery communities are largely low-income communities of color and have been disproportionately experienced health burdens as a result of living next to refineries and other sources of pollution within those communities. And refinery communities in Contra Costa and around the state are some of the most polluted communities in the state of California. And so as we prepare for refinery transition, there's a need and a burden that we need to plan for, and we have the opportunity to address. So part of this is, of course, the significant cleanup of these facilities. I mean, in some cases, these are over 1,000 acres right in the center of particular communities, whether that's Richmond or Martinez. And the cleanup is going to be significant. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, and we need to make sure that that cost is not borne by the community, that it's paid for by the companies themselves, and that they're not leaving that cost to the community or to the public. Communities are looking to be closely engaged in that process for re-envisioning future land use and undoing that legacy of environmental racism, to think about how can we have more park space, how can we have new development that is in alignment with community needs, that also creates the high quality jobs that refinery workers in the community needs. And so the refinery trend and addressing the tax base, which we've talked about, you know, this is going to be a significant need. So for Contra Costa County, we're looking at perhaps a third of the county's revenue connected to the refinery industry. For certain refinery communities, in some places such as Richmond, we believe it's about a quarter. So that's a significant need that we need to plan for, to make sure that public services don't suffer as a result of refinery closures. But I want to go back to this point that in planning for refinery transition, from the community's perspective, it really is an opportunity to rethink land use, to address the historic legacy of pollution, and to build a new vision for a new economy and land use decisions that creates high quality jobs, that provides a healthier environment, and it is about planning that future together. So those are some of the main issues that have been brought up in conversation with our community partners.
Thanks so much, Josh. We are coming down to to the wire here, and I want to make sure that we close on time. So maybe I just want to, I think at this point we should move to wrap up, but I want to give Virginia or Tracy a chance to share any thoughts about partnering with community or any kind of final thoughts that you want to share in a minute max.
I'll be very quick. I just want to uplift what both Josh and Tracy have said. And I just want to say to those of you who put questions in the chat, these are all the questions we need to be asking. And I can't answer many of them because I just studied, one small piece. But I think that this is critical, is that these sorts of questions from those of us who are the public, right, who are California residents, who are taxpayers, we need to keep asking these questions. What does a super fund for workers look like? In the spirit of Tony Mazzocchi, a former oil, chemical, and atomic worker leader, right? What does that really mean? What does addressing environmental racism really mean? And who pays? So please keep asking these questions and keep asking them of, our elected officials, of policymakers, because that's the only way forward. And I just want to reference, this story in the New York Times the other day about people moving back into Love Canal neighborhoods. Let's not have that happen, right? So let's really rethink what a just outcome looks like for these communities that are being devastated economically with the loss of these jobs and revenues, but also devastated from this, the environmental racism as well.
Tracy, final thoughts in 1 minute or less?
I think that our organization has long felt that we understood the concerns of the fence line and the communities in the locations that we work, and that our members are community members, and that we have concerns for our communities and our environment and our families that are not unlike those of people who view the fossil fuel industry as something that we need to transition away from. I think that from our perspective, we just need to find a way to do it in a way that is decent and provides equity in that solution. And that we are here to work with our partners in this community and look forward to doing that as this process takes place.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us and for sharing your really great questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to more of them, but we're all looking at them and thinking about it. I encourage you to follow up with us. If you have any other thoughts or questions about the report is available online at the Labor Center's website, and we will be posting this recording to the webinar. So I encourage you all to take a look and share and reach out if you want to talk about this more. I mean, I think we wanted to create a space for this discussion because this study is just incredibly valuable as a guide for what we need to be thinking about and working on now, and devising the sort of solutions that can actually create a transition to clean energy that is, more environmentally sustainable, and also create an economy that's more equitable for workers and their communities. The study tells us what workers need in their own words based on their lived experiences to ensure a successful transition. And so thank you all for paying attention and for participating. And we look forward to talking with you more in the future. And thanks to all our panelists for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your great thoughts. All right.
Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks. And thanks, Tracy, and to all your members who made this report possible. I think that's really critical that we recognize it was a lot of time on their part. They didn't know who I was. I bothered them a lot, and we are better off because of their participation. So thank you, Local 5 members.
Thank you all.